Let's get more analysis on this address. David McCuan is joining us live from Tamales. He's a professor and chair of political science at Sonoma State University. There's lots to talk about, David, but first of all, can I just get your broad reaction to Trump's address?
Okay, so President Bill Clinton in 2000 gives a speech that lasts about an hour and a half. This sets a new record. So just first the context, understanding that, this is a really big deal for Donald Trump in terms of talking about the speech and what's going on with that speech. But then look at who the audience is. This is a scripted MAGA kind of moment. And then it's also not just aimed at Republicans. He has to talk to American voters who helped elect him. In that process of helping to elect him, you think about those voters, you think about what's going on. Their concern is inflation, costs, what's happening there. He didn't do as much there, even though you have a speech that's about 90% domestic politics, 90% about what's happening in the U.S. economy, and about 10% in terms of foreign policy. That does make the Zelensky letter, the Zelensky moment and news a big deal, but it's also important for resetting relations with Europeans and what's going on there, important for what's going on across the world, important for our relationship with Turkey, NATO, but also with China and what's happening with Russia. When you look at all of that in terms of what's happening, it was a very interesting speech, but also typically Trump. And by typically Trump, it's going to be divisive, it's going to be confrontational. That's exactly what we saw tonight.
Let's start then with some of the domestic policy. As you say, it took up the lion's share of the speech. Right. Some quite clear points around being fiscally responsible, balancing the budget, cutting down on spending in order to cut taxes and create jobs. I suppose, what were the key elements and some of the things that we haven't heard so much on before that you might like to highlight? And do you think they'll work?
Well, look, I mean, when you're talking about tariffs and that impact, the tariffs announcement that happens today gets ahead of the speech. There's going to be a lag in terms of economic effects. He's asking people to take some time to think about what's going to happen because there's going to be hardship. The problem is in 10 days, right, the government runs out of money on March 14th. You head to the end of April. That's about his 100-day mark. What has Donald Trump shown in terms of progress during that time that voters can understand? There is a gap or a set of time where Donald Trump and Republicans have some running room. But it puts Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, a bit behind the gun, if you will, for delivering those votes. They're going to need Democratic votes. Democrats don't have exactly that answer for where they're coming forward and pushing forward with Donald Trump. They don't have exactly the messenger yet. They need to figure out their voice. But if you look at the calendar and events begin really to clash. And that is the case when you're looking at what comes in the aftermath of Syria, what comes with Iran or with Israel or relationships with China. There are a number of things out the world that you have to pay attention to and that Donald Trump and his team are going to have some difficulties kind of solving. That's why the Ukraine issue and what happened last Friday in the Oval Office, that stunning meeting that resets relationship with the Europeans, has kind of pushed the world back on its heels. Tonight's speech, heavily domestic focus, is also typically a victory lap. But Donald Trump goes much farther than that. He is in the face of Democrats and pushing hard against them. I think your previous analysts were a bit kind in terms of where he's at and what he's doing. He's trying to really keep Democrats reeling, and that also allows him to bring up Elon Musk, talk about Doge and everything happening in terms of their reset through executive orders of really America's political priorities.
Yes, David, it does seem like certainly at times the Democrats haven't recovered from their loss last year and certainly haven't found their voice again, perhaps in the chamber, in the House, but also in American politics more broadly. There seems to be a kind of lack of cohesive opposition there. Yeah, let's talk then about foreign policy. He mentioned this letter. And there's also a tweet as well by Volodymyr Zelensky. Some might describe them as perhaps a little bit groveling. Do you think that this can be the first step towards fixing their relations, towards getting aid for Ukraine back? Or do you think, that horse has left the stable, it's over, and maybe what we're actually looking at is a realignment of global politics here?
I think you can't understate that potential realignment. At the beginning of that press conference, it's about 49 minutes long. We see about the last 7 or 8 minutes of fireworks. But much earlier in that press conference, Donald Trump talks about the United States as a mediator, as an arbitrator of world conflicts and what's going on. That's an unusual condition when a nation has been invaded by another, Ukraine invaded by Russia. And that reset is more than just being an umpire or referee in the world. That begins at the Munich Security Conference, obviously with Vice President Vance's speech, Pete Hegseth's speech, but it also places Europeans behind a place. It places the future of NATO in a different place than it was just a month ago, just about the time this president comes in for Trump 2.0. It's a complete fundamental realtering of the world. And that's because Donald Trump is a transactional politician who's interested in the politics of grievance. He sees the United States as being aggrieved and not given its fair share by other nations. And as a result, he wants to arbitrate disputes, be transactional, be dictating and not dictated to. You see that with the tariffs today, with the Mexicans and the Canadians. It will continue, not just against the Chinese, but against other potential trading partners. Something to watch here as this develops over the next couple of months, while trying to get $4.5 trillion in tax cuts through the Congress, while the economy is somewhat faced with really uncertain times, as reflected by the market and what's been happening the last couple of days.
Absolutely, David. And as you say, we just don't exactly know how these tariffs will end up playing out on domestic and global markets. David McCuan from Sonoma University, thank you so much for joining us on TRT World. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.